Jonathan, we'll get started with you. We appreciate you being here, and we will get started with the Florida State aspect of it, if we can get started there, just because that's what most people are familiar with. Of course, they've been extremely public about their disdain for the ACC's distribution practices and where we have arrived here with the grant of rights and everything involved in them not being able to, by their words, compete with the rest of college athletics and college football in particular. So where do we stand with Florida State? How close do you think this is, and how much more of a fight do you think that they have yet to endure against the ACC to be free?
Well, the complaints have already been sent out from Florida State side. There's still some things that they have hidden in the back that they could still present to the public and as part of the lawsuit yet, if that is needed to come out. But the hope is to try to get a settlement done within the calendar year of 2024. And what the next deadline or important date is the 16th of February, so basically 15 days from now, when both sides are expected to provide answers. So I'm going to provide some very good news about Florida State here in a second, but I'm just going to allow Tony and the Tide Guy just introduce or say anything before I start getting into everything here.
Glad to be here for the chat. Thanks for inviting me.
Great to have you, Tony. Tide Guy, you as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of information that he will be bringing up, both from the Big Ten financials and that. And I think some people, when you hear the numbers that he has, and then what I can tell you from the SEC side, I know there's a lot of back and forth. People still hold out hope this team can go here, this team can go there. But for the most part, we think that's already done. That both the teams that will be leaving the ACC already know where they're going.
That's correct, Tide Guy. And I'm going to be presenting a lot of stuff about that here this evening. So the Florida State, they're going to have an invite provided to them from the Big Ten Conference the minute that the settlement is done with. So you're able to be very excited about that, Florida State fans. You don't have to worry about, well, will the Big Ten Conference take us? Are we an institutional fit for the Big Ten Conference and all of that? You absolutely are. You have an invite waiting for you. I've confirmed everything there is around that. I can't go into the details around it, but yes, you get full shares and that invite is waiting for you. So get that settlement done and you can accept the Big Ten offer if you guys want to take that up. So the other big news that we need to cover here, this Florida State will be involved in this. That's why we're going to bring it up, because it is important and it will impact Florida State. That will be a breakaway for the Big Ten Conference and the Southeast Conference as well. Because what the conferences have for the Big Ten and SEC by this summer is they want to try to have either a model or action in place to have a breakaway happening by this summer. So there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of alerts happening between the conferences as well as the schools inside both of those conferences to get this completed. And I'm going to let Tide Guy go into the specifics of why this is happening. And then I'm going to provide just one more important information about the breakaway.
We kind of thought the breakaway was going to take a little bit longer. But as you've seen this week, the NCAA is going after Tennessee, Florida State, and Florida for some violations that wasn't even rules when they committed these violations. And so the two conferences want to just get out of all this litigation. They want to break away. They want to provide their own rules. Plus, the NCAA is being sued. And so that's why you saw last week that UNC started having meetings. They had their board of trustee meetings. Nothing was finalized, but you could see it's in place that they're ready to leave at any time. And I think you will see in the next couple weeks that Virginia will also be having the same type of meetings. And you will see that they want to break away as well. I know a lot of people don't want to see the P2 happen. I'm one of them that kind of is going to miss regional football, but it's kind of come down to this because of the actions the NCAA has made. And then financially, it just makes more sense to break away.
Yep. Tony, anything to provide before I drop some more news around this?
I would say to a lot of folks, one of the things just to keep in mind, we talk a lot about institutional fit. One of the things about the ACC is that most of the ACC teams are above the academic and institutional thresholds that you would expect for the Big Ten members. Like the ACC is an outstanding conference with like elite, outstanding universities. Most of these schools are institutions that that fit the profile of the Big Ten and the SEC. So one of the things people we talk when we talk about realignment stuff, we talk about a lot of factors. Know that the institutions that are being talked about, again, from an institutional standpoint, are all above that line. So that's where, why you don't hear some of the things that you would sort of historically hear about, Big Ten expansion is because these are all great schools that have already crossed those hurdles.
Genetics, before we move on to Tony's point, I've got one quick question and one other quick point to make. One would be AAU status. So Florida State is in the running. They had hoped to get it here in the last go around, but they did not. Do we think that that's going to be any kind of barrier? So that's my first question.
No, because the Big Ten Conference was founded by non-AAU schools. So when the conference was founded, close, yes, but AAU did not exist at that time. So it's just a technicality I wanted to point out that I love to point out to people just as a humorous kind of thing that I like to do. But since the 1950s when Michigan State was added, they were not in the AAU at the time. But the schools that were added after that were. So the schools that were added prior to Michigan State, Ohio State, etc., they were actually not AAU members when they joined, but they became AAU members a few years later. So
and in fairness, there were like 20 AAU members at that time.
Yep.
Now there's like 70.
Around that. That's correct. Yep. Around that number. Yep.
So it's growing. One thing to remember too, just to throw this in there, remember, Florida State does more research than a lot of members of the AAU. Especially, and now Florida State has come out with some new, now the FY22 numbers just came out from the National Science Foundation, just like a month ago. Florida State, who should know their own internal information, has said that their FY23 numbers are up about 25%. They think it's like 400 and some million. If that's accurate, and I mean, I'm not an auditor, I can't tell you. If that's accurate, then they will be well above many of the AAU members, above the Notre Dames and above the Tulanes and probably the Rices. I mean, a lot of those schools.
And let's be honest, if the Big Ten does want Florida State to be AAU,
they'll probably get it.
They'll make it.
Although they made two very powerful, very kind of dumb enemies in Cal, who has like 7 AAU votes of their own or something, and right. Stanford. So whether they get it or not, we'll see. They're making very good friends and very big enemies at the same time.
And
they are. Yep.
The other portion of this that I'm interested in, when you talk about the breakaway, both you and Tide Guy, and I think I'm speaking for the college football fans that are in the chat and everybody who's going to watch this video. This is what they care about. They care about their own team, of course, but beyond that, they care about conference alignment, what conference they're in, how powerful that conference is. They care about scheduling as a byproduct of that. And number 3, they care about the playoff. Who's going to be eligible for the playoff? So when you guys talk about a breakaway, are we talking about a technical breakaway, or just there's going to be such a separation of resources and power and all of that? Or are we talking about a technical breakaway in terms of we're playing a playoff by ourselves?
They want to leave the NCAA altogether. Okay. So it would be their own playoff. Yeah. That was the other part of the news I was going to drop. Yeah.
And one thing I do want to say, Fox and ESPN are looking at this totally different. ESPN is still kind of using the Stone Age figures. They want the SEC to take different states where Fox is kind of outfoxing ESPN. They want the big markets. That's why they want into Florida. They want the Florida state. They want the bigger markets where one team we'll talk about here later is Clemson, and you'll find out kind of the dilemma that they're caught in because of how Fox and ESPN is going about adding schools to, let's face it, it's their conference. Fox kind of runs the Big Ten, ESPN kind of runs the SEC.
Yeah, so just one more point about the AAU. So Florida State has a goal of this calendar year to hit $500 million. But that's nice and all, but what's more important than the dollar value is the actual NIH dollars. So NIH dollars has a very big influence on AAU, because I'm going to be going into in a lot more detail about AAU and the research aspect. So I'm going to be talking about the membership indicators, so institutional breadth, ability to provide additional input on research and educational programs and everything around that. So the AAU part, we're going to get into a little bit more detail here coming up in a little bit. So the other important thing to deliver tonight is the revenue sharing. So this is a part of the effort to break away in order to provide revenue sharing through an employee model. So they want to try to get that done by this spring or this summer as well. And I can't go into specific details because I'll get people in trouble if I do, but from a big picture overview, a lot of the revenue sharing is going to be performance-based and retainment-based. So depending on the type of employee contracts that they do, whether it's at will or contracted based, so the ability to get compensated by staying on a yearly contract throughout 4 years. So if you sign a contract after the first year at will employment is completed, you can get a payment. So they're thinking about that kind of structure in order to prevent and slow down the turnover and erosion every single year for the football and basketball rosters. And for the breakaway, it is for football and basketball. I'm sorry to deliver the basketball aspect to it, but that is true. So anything you guys want to add before I go on to the next part?
No, I think we're good on this part.
All right. So there's another very big thing that is going on. So I got to be careful how I word this. So I'm going to say it very slowly. So a team will have a specific number of athletes that's currently regulated by the NCAA. But remember, they want to leave the NCAA as part of the breakaway. This allows the ability to change the structure of how these teams are made up financially. So the scholarship aspect of things, they are talking about completely eliminating scholarships or increasing the amount of scholarships. So when you're talking about athletes as employees, when you're thinking about the whole scholarship aspect of it, you've got to remember over time, you cannot cap pay. There'll be an open economy for the competition for athletes. And do they do an at will or contract? Defined contract is a technical lawyer words for that. So the challenge is if they're on scholarship and they receive a wage, they are not capable of getting the same amount of funds as they currently do because they're not as eligible for those funds. So that's why these conversations are happening around scholarships to go along with everything else that I've shared this evening. So you're going to see a very large turnover of how these teams are structured, how they're financed, and we're going to talk about NIL here in a little bit and the impact of that for everything. So that's what I had to share about all of that. And then my next topic is going to start getting into the Florida State and Big Ten aspects of things. So if Tony and Tide Guy want to say anything, feel free.
My only question at this stoppage of play here would be, if we are going in this direction, what makes professional sports thrive, of course, is the distribution of resources and talent. So the NFL is able to say, we have an NFL draft. We operate as an entire company. We're not individual companies. We are the company. Therefore, we can determine that Ole Miss quarterback, you're going here, and Ohio State running back, you're going here, because we have a draft. Is there still going to be freedom of choice for these athletes? They're still going to go to the most desired locations. We would expect those to remain the same as what they are now. Or is there going to be, since there is employment there, a right for, if this is going to be a corporation of sorts, to designate where these players play?
The athletes that'll be at will, it'll be a yearly contract, so there can be an economy of competition for that batch of athletes. But if they do the defined contract, then they're going to have to essentially buy that individual / athlete out of that contract, unless they collectively bargain that is not an option, or they could collectively bargain that is an option. So it's all going to come down to how things are structured. So, Mark, that's all I can answer for that right now.
And this could also guarantee that these players would be obligated to play postseason games outside the playoff because they're under contract.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. They would not receive a check if they do not finish out the season.
Yep.
And one of the things I think is really important to reiterate to folks too, when we talk about collective bargaining, the issue is that you basically have to move to a system of collective bargaining, because otherwise you have two options. You have three options, actually. You can keep losing in court, like on a daily basis, or you can collectively bargain, or you can have absolute anarchy. So, the way that you put in process and restrictions and order, just like in any business, is by collectively bargaining, where the employees, or the athletes in this case, give up some of their benefits of freedom in exchange for things that they have collectively bargained for. And the sooner that we get to that reality, the better, because again, they're just going to keep losing like they are on a daily basis.
All right, so I'm going to bring up my presentation here.
Do you mind if I ask one other question? Because I still can't get a grasp on NIL, and I understand why it's not functioning, but for those that are wanting college athletics, and football in particular, to run as purely as it possibly can in a reasonable sense, it's never going to be the same, but in a reasonable sense, why was there no initiative to try to rein in NIL, make it what it was intended to be? The athletes could be compensated for name, image, and likeness like any other private citizen in this country, and then we could keep the education and the scholarship and the amateur aspect of all this, but they could still make a significant amount of money through NIL if it was run properly.
The Sherman Antitrust Act. They're literally running a cartel. They're running an illegal cartel. They have been forever, and now they're finally. And the thing, remember, guys, the thing about the NCAA is they were always wrong. They just fought, and they used every litigation tool in the books to fight it and drag things out for years and years and years. The problem is, now that they've started losing, the precedent is with them losing. And so they're just going to keep losing. They're going to get injunctions like they just got an injunction that just demolished their rules on transfers like in a day. They're probably going to get another injunction that's going to get rid of their NIL enforcement, because they're acting like an illegal cartel. They're trying to violate the Sherman Antitrust Act, and every excuse they keep making up, those excuses worked for years and years and years. But once you start losing, then it's over. And it's over for them as far as like continuing to illegally try to restrict income without collectively bargain, without the athletes giving a consent for that restriction.
And see,
again,
Tony, the problem
really angers people, but it's true.
And the problem, Tony, was they didn't think they were going to lose. So they didn't have the plan B. So if we lose, we need to have these rules in place. So none of the rules were in place. NIL happened. It's the Wild West. Some schools did better than others. And that's why you're seeing now the NCAA is trying to go after some schools, because what they did was questionable, but there was no rules.
Well, and the other thing is they really believe, I'm told, they believe that Governor Baker is going to get Congress to give them an exemption. So, for example, baseball has an antitrust exemption. They think that they're going to get an now, if they did, if Congress writes the law and Congress says and passes and the president signs a bill, you know, we get that old how a bill becomes a law, and that law says, you know, college athletes are exempt from antitrust laws, then sure, they can do whatever. But, I mean, Congress is literally making fun of them. Leading people in Congress are making fun of the fact that they think that they're going to get this miraculous bill. And every time they go to Washington, they come back and they're like, we're going to get our bill. And then you see I mean, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on, guys. Congress isn't passing this bill, and they're not doing it anytime soon. I mean, it's funny because we have people in the chat who are like, you don't have to do this. Yeah, you do. Or you keep losing every day in court. You're going to lose and the worst part is now they're getting injunctions against it. So the NCAA can't keep playing its game of, we're going to drag this out for 3 years of litigation, which is what they did forever. That's what they did to Jeremy Bloom. Jeremy Bloom should have blown this whole thing up in, what was that, 99, 2000? And they fought Jeremy Bloom in the courts. Well, now that they've lost, they're just going to keep losing, and they're going to lose harder every time.
And it's funny, Tony, because the example you just brought up, that was only maybe 8 weeks ago that they tried to reinstitute the transfer rule. And part of me thought when I saw that, okay, this is great. People will enjoy this. People will like this. Then when it got completely repealed, I thought, oh yeah, of course it did. Because
again, cartel behavior is wonderful if you can keep it up. So they can do what De Beers does and go like hide in South Africa, or they can follow the law.
At the end of the day, the Supreme Court already told the public and everybody, come back to us as more cases, because NCAA is an antitrust walking case. Remember?
Yeah. I mean, again, when you have Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Kagan arm in arm saying you're a terrible cartel, like, yeah, you're a terrible cartel. There's not. Yeah. Both sides of the spectrum agree. Well, one thing our nation can politically unify on is that the NCAA is a terribly run cartel.
All right. So what I'm going to talk about here for roughly the next half hour is Florida State and Big Ten membership. So how will the Florida State benefit from it athletically, institutionally, financially, doing some TV contract discussions as well. But before I get into all of that, the conversation that I need to go over is the mandate for Tony Petitti that was given to him by the Big Ten presidents. So when I describe what those mandates are, you're going to completely 100% understand why an offer is waiting on the table for Florida State once that lawsuit is finalized, because it's going to make 100% sense. So Tony Petitti, he was hired on April 11th, and one of the reasonings why he was hired is his innovative history that he has. So everybody knows about his history. Everybody knows about the BCS, one of the architectures of that. So that's one of the driving factors for his hire in the Big Ten as the commissioner. And what he is mandated to do is grow the Big Ten Conference from a media and exposure perspective, where it is by far the largest one in college athletics and bigger than the majority of all professional leagues. So there's 2 professional leagues that the Big Ten is not going to be able to overcome, obviously, and that's the NBA and NFL. But they are very close to the Major League Baseball from a TV contract, because in the next Big Ten TV contract that will happen in 2020-30, that they will negotiate in 2028 and 2029, you're going to have the state of Florida included in there. You're going to have Los Angeles now included in there. You're going to have the entire Midwest. You're going to have the Northeast included in there. So when you're able to now combine a TV contract that has Florida in it, the state of California in it, the entire Midwest, New Jersey. Some people claim they have New York. They already have Northern Virginia. So UVA they're not even an option for Big Ten for expansion because Fox Sports already said no about that option. So you're able to take a national conference all into one media contract, and the value is going to surpass $10 billion for over a 6 or 7 year period. It could potentially get up to $11 to $12 billion, depending on the amount and type of ACC schools that the Big Ten is able to land prior to 2030. There's basically two waves that are expected out of the ACC expansion, Florida State by themselves. And I'll get into a little bit more detail when we talk about partners, but the big takeaway is Tony Petitti is expected to innovate and he's expected to grow the value of the Big Ten Conference. And how do you do that? You get into the massive population in the state of Florida. So if anybody ever still says on Twitter or elsewhere in the media, like those a-holes at ESPN that still say, well, the Big Ten is not interested in Florida State, it's a total BS talking point that they spew out all the time. Because Tony Petitti, presidents, everybody else, athletic departments inside the Big Ten, they want Florida State. They want it to the state of Florida because that's going to add another $200 million plus of annual revenue into the TV contract. So why would they not be interested? So, okay, so now we're going to just point out real quick here. We're not going to spend any time on this because it's a waste of time. Is Florida State a fit for the Big Ten Conference? Yes, 100%. As you can see here, all of the different ways that you can measure academic ranking, there's no outlier for Florida State. They're fit. Let's not waste our time on that. So from a football perspective, is Florida State additive from a football perspective? Obviously they are. So we're not going to waste our time on that. So here we got to make sure we go through all these topics here pretty quickly because we could spend an hour just on these alone. So the first part is the lawsuit settlement. So we're not lawyers. We're not going to spend any time talking about the actual lawsuit itself. There's other places you can go to for that. But what I want to point out is the dollar figure. So what is the dollar figure that a lot of people are expecting Florida State to end up paying to exit the ACC? So a lot of athletic departments are speculating that Florida State will probably spend about $150 million to get out of the ACC. Yes, that's a number that other people have speculated as well, but from my own perspective, I have the actual dollars behind why people are speculating $150 million in a potential exit. So there is a way to go from roughly $150 million as a potential exit cost to $90 million or even less. So the goal for Florida State, yes, they want to try to get out within the 2024 year to try to compete within the Big Ten Conference for the 2024 football season. If they can get the settlement completed quick enough to allow that to happen, Florida State's going to be like, you need to pay, the ACC is going to tell Florida State, you need to pay $150 million or $200 million. Here's your check, we're gone, see you later. That's what's going to happen. But from a dollar perspective, the $130 million exit cost is a straight line number, and the GOR value that's been calculated is part of the exit. So when you think about the ESPN contract, there is no value, so there's no money attached to that contract past 2027 in the current state of that contract. So there's 2 years of GOR value that a lot of athletic departments are thinking that Florida State's going to be required to pay, which will come out to $66 million. Well, if Florida State exits this year, they can have the ACC keep what the Florida State's payout would be, which would be roughly $40 million in total. Well, that can now be subtracted from Florida State's exit cost. So the actual dollar figure was $156 million when you take the exit cost plus the GOR cost. Well, now if you take the cost of the ACC keeping Florida State's payment, you're now down to $90 million. So what will happen to the ACC if Florida State's only required to pay $90 million as part of the settlement? Well, the following schools are adios. Florida State, obviously, UNC, Miami, Clemson, UVA, and Notre Dame. They're all gone. So that's 6 schools. So you can imagine the kind of value that the ACC will be at after losing those 6 schools. All right, so we're going to talk about partners because I already went over the financial aspects of this. So, Tide Guy, provide the SEC side of things here.
All right. The SEC, they've already been in contact behind closed doors, obviously, with UNC and Virginia. UNC has a couple board of trustees that would like to see the Big Ten call. But the main power players want UNC in with the SEC. So if North Carolina decided tomorrow that they want out, they have an invitation to the SEC, and Virginia would be their travel partner. Now, the problem we have, though, is Clemson. Clemson right now does not have a home. The Big Ten has not specifically stated that they want them, and the SEC does not know that they want to go past 18 members right now.
Yep, and the other aspect of UNC that I know, UNC wants to file a lawsuit pretty soon. So they may actually come up before Clemson if Clemson keeps dragging their feet.
Yeah, because right now it's almost like a game of musical chairs. There's only so many seats. So, these schools are going to have to get out quick to make sure they have a seat at the table.
Yep. All right. So from the Big Ten side of things, so as Tide Guy laid out, 100% there's truth to exactly everything he just said. UNC has an offer on the table to the SEC. Yes, the Big Ten did want North Carolina, but they already are expecting to not get them, unfortunately, because it is a valuable school, just not as valuable as Florida State from a football perspective and obviously TV viewership. But when you're talking about all the other Olympic sports, North Carolina is an extremely additive school for the SEC. So, Tony, you want to talk about UNC to the SEC for anything you want to lay out there for them?
Sure. So, I can't personally vouch for any behind the scenes meetings, but I can tell you that just from a data standpoint, when you look at the metrics, Carolina fits very much the profile of the SEC schools. Remember that since its founding in 1932, every single school the SEC has added has been either a state flagship and or an AAU member. And Carolina and Virginia are both. So, again, I can't promise what will happen, but those schools very much fit the SEC strategy of we want flagship schools in continuous states that add value to us. So, I defer to Grant, Lord Sankey, our guru on the value piece, but certainly they are elite athletic departments and flagship schools of their states, which are contiguous and sort of complete a whole in the SEC.
Yeah. And it allows branding expansion for the Southeast Conference, which is a very big deal. That's why the Big Ten wanted UNC, even though UNC sucks in football. Sorry for any UNC fans that may be watching, but that's the truth. But the Southeastern Conference will be able to gain the value aspects of that. So,
one thing is also about Carolina, just to add, and I don't have I've seen some modeling on this, but I can't vouch for the exact numbers. But remember that Carolina basketball is so good that its sort of net additive value is a lot more than any other school's basketball value. And that helps make up for likely some little less football value.
100% right there. Because UNC will be the most valuable basketball asset in the SEC day one. It's not even close either.
Probably, or the Big Ten if you were to watch Big Ten basketball lately.
Well, and also UNC
lately, yeah.
really going to help the SEC academically. I mean, getting them would be a huge gain for the SEC.
And speaking of that Tide guy, say you're Alabama, Joe.
Some people don't realize that the SEC has outstanding institutions. They have a ton of AAU members. Remember, the SEC does more research than the Ivy League, so keep that in mind.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And what do you like to say down there in the state of Alabama? Don't let people know how smart our athletes and our students actually are.
Yep.
All right. So for the Big Ten, what they are wanting to do is expand along the I-95 corridor. That's not anything that's a secretive information. A lot of people know about that, and it's pretty damn obvious too when you think about I-95 corridor expansion. Why? Population. There's a lot of growth happening there as well. So they're going to be able to put the Big Ten branding in a completely new area of the country. So obviously the Florida State offer is on the table waiting to be sent to Florida State once that settlement is completed. And as I mentioned earlier, UVA, so Virginia is no longer an option for the Big Ten because Fox Sports said no, because they're dilutive. So they would lose money for the Big Ten athletic departments. And then as soon as they were told that, adios, out the door, you're no longer an option, no debate. So Notre Dame, they are going to be the target after Florida State if Florida takes up a Big Ten offer. And that's why you'll hear people talk about Florida State going on their own. It's because once Florida State's in the door, let me go over the value of why this makes sense to you all, because then you'll be able to understand why the Big Ten would hold off on a 20th edition once you hear these numbers. So Notre Dame to the Big Ten by themselves is worth $225 million annually for the TV contract. So the contract is currently $1.125 billion per year, averaged out throughout the entire TV contract. And once you add Notre Dame into it, it's $1.457 billion. And if you divide that among the 16 schools or 18 schools, you're able to get $86 million of static media revenue. So the static means the payment paid directly from the network to the conference. The conference distributes that static number, and then it's distributed based off a specific formula to the specific schools within the conference. And then the rest of the conference payout value is added on top of it. So post-expansion, basketball, football, playoff, all of that money is added onto it, obviously. So the static media value. So, Tony, real quick, like a minute or two, go over equity, and then I'm going to go into the rest of the values, because when we're talking about static media revenue, money that is consistent, calculated throughout a period of time, relate that back to the equity part quick.
You mean private equity?
Correct, yeah.
What aspect? You want me to go in about like
Just
what are the issues with private equity?
No, yeah, correct. The issues and that.
So there's a lot of talk right now about private equity investment in college sports. I would warn you guys that a lot of it is just people saying buzzwords that don't know what it means. Now there are some opportunities for some minor aspects of private equity, right? Like real estate development stuff, or outsourcing some things, or things like that. But the sort of traditional buyout model that you guys you'd expect from private equity, I think there's a lot of problems in that for college sports. And the reason is because there's several reasons. First of all, what private equity does is it provides capital and liquidity. Universities have access to unlimited capital. Private equity uses, lots of debt and interest tax shields to help generate their profits. Colleges have access to debt terms that private equity shops would kill for and dream of. Colleges have no problem getting access to capital. Then, they don't pay taxes, so there's no tax shield. And finally, private equity firms make a lot of money. And if there's one thing colleges don't want to do, it's let other people make a lot of money off them for a very long time. So there is an opportunity for things like outsourcing of services and parts of athletics. They might outsource part of the athletic department. I don't know about that, but they do that with their bookstores, for example, already. They outsource the bookstore for somebody else to run it. But if somebody's going to come in and they're going to be making 20, 30% returns off you, colleges aren't going to let that last for very long. I'll just give you an example. How is Florida State handling the fact that ESPN contract is pretty profitable for ESPN right now? they're not handling it well. So I can tell you none of these schools are going to let somebody come in and make 30% returns off them. So be wary when you hear people talk about private equity. Are these people just saying buzzwords like they don't actually know or work with PE firms? Mostly. Or are they just sort of hoping like they're using private equity as a euphemism for like, we hope stupid Saudis will give us $1 billion for nothing. Like it's a very interesting situation right now. A lot of people are just spewing buzzwords. They don't know what they mean. I've worked with private equity shops for 20 years. So I can tell you right now that schools do not want private equity firms to come and make private equity returns off of their athletic department. It's not going to last long.
All right. So the reasoning why I wanted Tony to go in there and real quick provide that private equity aspect of it. So when we're talking about all of these big dollar numbers that I'm sharing here, so they basically private equity wants to try to get their hands on things in the college athletics realm. So the schools, not school districts, wrong. I almost talked about my job there. So the universities, the universities need to be very smart and very careful. When we're talking about $86 million of a static media revenue payout, don't give that up to a private equity. That'd be incredibly stupid. So the other aspects of the
because they're going to keep a large piece of it.
Yeah, that's correct. That's why I'm pointing this out. So Florida State plus Notre Dame. So this here is why the Big Ten will pause, ask Notre Dame. Notre Dame will have a new athletic director. They'll have a new president. So will the Big Ten be able to convince Notre Dame that the ACC, their TV contract, scheduling contract with the ACC is no longer of value to Notre Dame plus NBC and the TV contract that Notre Dame has signed with NBC. So when you combine Florida State plus Notre Dame, the static media revenue is $90 million per school. And then you add on the playoff money, etc., which has grown from an average of $15 million per school to $18 million per school. You have now greatly exceeded the $100 million mark. And by the time the new contract will come out in 2030, that $90 million that I just laid out is now going to be valued around $100 million to $110 million for every school, every university for that TV contract. So when you're adding Florida State plus Notre Dame plus the current members, that static media value payout will exceed over $110 million per university. So when you are talking about Florida State being added with North Carolina or Miami, it's only going to add roughly $75 million. The static media payout is only going to be about $75 million per school. So why rush to add a partner with Florida State until you have communicated with Notre Dame? Yes, Notre Dame people are not going to like hearing, why are you after us again? We're not going to join your conference. We live independently. The biggest myth in college athletics is Notre Dame independence. The only thing that is independent of Notre Dame is 60% of a football schedule. Everything else is already residing within a conference. So that's all of the values for the travel partners. So now you're all able to understand why Florida State would just go on their own to begin with, because of all of the money that the Big Ten could make if they're able to land Notre Dame before going down that list. And yes, the Big Ten realizes North Carolina is going to go to the SEC. So let's go on to the next topic here. So real quick here. So if the Florida State is able to pay roughly $90 million for an exit cost, or $150 million for an exit cost, basically like $200 million or less. Well, over the next 5 years, the Big Ten payouts are going to be $425 million for a single school. So the Florida State is not going to have a problem paying for the exit, as long as we're not talking $400 million for an exit cost. So the Florida State, if they can get that negotiated, get that settlement down, completed, then they can get to the Big Ten, hopefully within the 2024 football season. And if not, get there in the 2025 football season, get paid $425 million, and that's a conservative number or more. Then they're going to be able to pay back the ACC unless Big Ten or Fox Sports donates whatever amount of money that they want to Florida State to help that payment to the ACC. So that could be an option as well. So the partner values I already went over. So the other really important topic to discuss here is the NIL. So when we're talking about Florida State needing to get out of the ACC for all of the various reasons, from an NIL perspective, how much money does an NIL need to contribute to a football team to have a competitive roster? So it's roughly that $4 million mark to $10 million or more. So when you think about Ohio State this offseason, the kind of talent that they were able to acquire through NIL deals, and yes, all of those deals are real, structured through a company to provide services. So the athlete will have to do various kinds of work for that company. So those NIL deals are real, but it's the collective whole. That's why you're able to see national average 11.2% growth in the collectives from year 2 to year 3, is because people are now understanding that yes, you need money to acquire elite talent to fill out a roster, but you also need the money to retain. So when I was talking earlier about athletes being employees, whether it will be an at will or a defined contract for an athlete. So when you're talking about NIL, well, the NIL relationship is going to then go through a change with the university. So the specifics on that I can't get into because I'll get people in trouble. So I'm going to avoid that. But expect a change with the relationships between the collectives, the NIL efforts, and the eventual athlete and employee aspects of everything. So also NIL, you're able to see here in this little graph that NIL dollars does contribute to success on the football field. So there is a correlation between NIL dollars spent and success on the football field. So as you can see, ACC has not done well. The Big Ten has. SEC is basically in the middle. So Tide Guy, do you have any information that you could provide from like the NIL efforts down there in the SEC or anything like that?
The SEC right now has like a 2-tier program. A lot of the SEC are doing the commercials with local businesses, is where a lot of the people make their NIL money. And then I know Alabama, Florida, and I believe South Carolina has done a marketing with various clothing stores. Like Alabama had the big length this year, shirts with Milrow and them to make money. And they're trying, the SEC is trying to get it where it's more competitive, where like schools like Texas A&M, who have a bunch of money, can't just pour in a bunch of money, to try to make it a little more fair from an NIL standpoint. But they're hoping that when they break away, to be able to restrict it even a little bit more.
Yep. All right. So the benefits for Florida State as a university. So we're talking about institutional growth, audience value. So the audience value is more on the football side of things from a viewership perspective. So I'll go over that here in a quick second. So you're going to be able to see growth and exposure. That's for athletics as well as the institution itself. So as an institution growth, the Big Ten will be able to provide academic alliance that will allow Florida State to benefit from a student and faculty perspective through a lot of shared resources and collaboration. So over a decade, the Florida State will be able to see a value gain of double the resources that they currently receive and also have access to within their own institution. And the way that works is there's a lot of sharing aspects of the Big Ten Conference. So the BTTA, the cancer program, so you're able to share a lot of resources. You're able to share a lot of collaboration. Basically, the main takeaway is the ability to grow from a resources perspective, double what Florida State currently has as an institution. So there's a lot of institutional growth. At the end of the day, Florida State as a university has the opportunity to grow from a larger volume perspective, meaning money, than the actual athletic department. So athletic department, you're talking about static media revenue value gain, ticket sales gain, brand gain, ad sales gain, all that. So basically that's just money growth within the athletic department. But from an institutional perspective, it's a lot about the endowment. You're able to graduate more students. You're able to graduate more science degrees. You're able to bring in more NIH dollars through all of the buildings and research efforts that Florida State is undergoing. So as an institution, Florida State will be able to have, after a decade of Big Ten membership, double their institutional resources. So I'm going to talk about the athletic impact here real quick for Florida State. So Florida State is a Big Ten member. For all of the sports that the Big Ten sponsors, as well as all of the men's sports that Florida State currently sponsors, there's only 2 sports from the men's side of things that will be impacted from a scheduling traveling perspective, which is basketball and baseball. The women's side of things, the only thing that would be impacted is basketball, soccer, softball, and volleyball. So most of the sports that Florida State sponsors will not even be impacted because cross country, golf, indoor track and field, outdoor and track and field, swimming and diving, tennis, cross country, golf, rowing. Florida State offers rowing. So you're able to see that Florida State also offers beach volleyball. Well, the Big Ten don't offer beach volleyball. So
but it should, says USC and UCLA.
Yes, they should, but that's a different conversation for a different day. How can the Big Ten continue growing? Trust me, I already have all that stuff mapped out for future expos. So that'll be coming. So the traveling impact from a football perspective, there's basically very little to no impact at all because I mapped out a football schedule with 5 Big Ten road games where I'm traveling to New Jersey, I'm traveling to Seattle, I'm traveling to Nebraska, and then I'm traveling to the Midwest. Well, it's not even a 24-hour difference. It's actually only about 17 hours of a difference because I averaged out the previous 3 football seasons. I did not do COVID season, obviously, and there was very little difference. So what's going to be very important from a resources perspective for Florida State is going to be the gain that they can get through that static media money. So when you're talking about subsidies, Tony's going to go over subsidies real quick here. Donor contributions, ticket sales, corporate sponsorships. Well, if you're having more big games, how is that Florida State? With all those Big Ten institutions coming down, where you're going to be able to get more corporate sponsors, more dollars out of the corporate sponsors, more advertising, licensings, because whenever they're doing a new licensing offering for any of their buildings, well, they can upcharge it because there's more visibility coming in, there's more advertisement coming in, all of that. So from a subsidy perspective, Florida State will be able to decrease that dependency. So Tony, just real quick, talk about subsidy.
So most athletic departments are subsidized in one of 2 ways, or both in a lot of cases, which is through sort of mandatory fees on students and then often large institutional subsidies where they're giving the athletic department money. At the same time, remember, the athletic department's subsidizing the school back through tuition payments, but in most cases, it's a net negative, except for the Big Ten and the SEC, where many of the athletic departments break even. Or when you sort of factor in, again, sort of the resubsidies back from the athletic department are big dollar money makers for the schools. And again, that doesn't even count the indirect stuff, the marketing aspects and things like that. So one of the things, particularly for a school like Florida State, where Florida State is a large school, but they're not a like, behemoth financially like a Carolina or a Duke or somebody like that, to where it's small potatoes. They are putting in huge subsidies into their athletic department. And from what I understand, they would very much like to stop that. So with a lot of these schools, the question is sort of how much can you continue subsidizing? Now, you do subsidize for a reason, right? Because you want to have those Olympic sports, because that's really what you're paying for. And the question is, sort of how much is too much? Houston and Central Florida are dumping in like $50 million a year of student money. At Coastal Carolina, every student that goes to Coastal Carolina is paying $4,000 per student just for the subsidy of their athletic department. So Coastal Carolina tomorrow, if they were to stop doing that, for example, could be $4,000 a student cheaper. Florida State, from what I understand, would like to not have its subsidy by having its athletic department be a little more self-sufficient. I mean, you're seeing with Arizona right now, they're in a quagmire of subsidy. So we'll see what happens.
All right, so we just went over that subsidy part here. So I'm going to bypass that. So currently, a lot of people already know this, but it's just really the big takeaway that Florida State is being undervalued as an ACC member. And in order for Florida State to extract their true value, they need to leave the ACC and become a Big Ten member. And as the example, USC, they were worth 30% of the Pac-12 contract. But as a Big Ten member, they were finally able to get their true value extracted within and embedded within to a TV contract. So now USC is going to go from the disaster that they were in within the Pac-12's TV contract to now the Big Ten TV contract. They're going to greatly exceed the $100 million per year number by the end of the current TV contract as a result of that. So USC is now going to get their true value. Oregon is basically a discount duck. Washington, half price off as well. But Florida State, they will receive full shares as a Big Ten member out of the gate. So Florida State will be able to utilize their full value. So we don't need to spend any more time on that. So the other point that I want to make out here is the Big Ten does over $18 billion in research. So when I'm talking about static media revenue, it can go from $75 million per school if you added Miami with Florida State. But if you added Notre Dame with Florida State, it's going to be $90 million average through 2030 from a static media revenue. So $18 billion compared to the millions that we're talking about from a media rights value perspective. There's much more gain to have as a Big Ten institution through research dollars than there are in any other aspects of everything. So real quick, the AAU membership impact. What Florida State is going to be able to do is gain AAU membership, and obviously they cannot control when they could be invited to the AAU. Yes, you can say you want to get $500 million of research done. Yes, you can say you want to have X number of NIH grant awards won. But it's going to still always come down to the evaluation of the AAU and when they want to add new members. So the last membership, which happened last year, there were several years that went by before AAU added those schools this last year. So membership for the AAU is guided by membership principles and membership indicators. So basically what all that means is how much is the breadth and quality of the research programs, how many graduate education as well as the research. So the membership indicators is all about the institutional breadth and quality of the research and education and the ability to provide additional input on research and education programs. So the ability to have AU membership coinciding with the Big Ten Academic Alliance from a sharing and purchasing perspective will allow Florida State to grow massively in their research through the sharing and purchasing capability. Because when you're talking about purchasing, you're talking about savings of millions and millions and millions of dollars annually and getting access to world famous researchers that you can now collaborate inside of the Big Ten Academic Alliance that they can not currently do. So that's really just a big takeaway. It's all about the NIH dollars. And when you're talking about research impact for the AC schools to the Big Ten, the order of that actual research impact of the ACC schools to the Big Ten is in this very specific order. It's Florida State, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Duke, and Virginia. So Duke and North Carolina, because they reside in the same state, they're just paired together. So basically, the main takeaway is the Big Ten, by adding Florida State, will be able to continue growing that $18 billion per year of annual research that they do. How much of a percentage growth can the Big Ten still grow by adding Florida State? I can't calculate that because it's all based off of the committees that do all of the grant awards and everything like that. But there's still going to be continued growth. There's still money out there that the Big Ten can add to their whole research dollar value that they do by adding Florida State. So real quick, every new Big Ten member since Penn State has seen a growth in research. So that data is clear. Florida State will be able to see growth in their research. Florida State will never see the day where they're going to be able to have a university budget the size of Penn State, Ohio State, Johns Hopkins, Washington, etc. But if Florida State becomes a Big Ten member, they could have a goal of wanting to become a Minnesota, becoming an Illinois, becoming a Michigan State from a university budget perspective. And that's going to be very important as we move forward to the athlete and employee stage of athletics. So the larger that the university budget is, the easier it's going to be for the university to remain competitive at the top end of college athletics. And the next slide here, TV contracts, just real quick here. The 22 college football season, the Big Ten had 74 games that were broadcasted on network TV. So the ABC, Fox, and then they moved to the new TV contract, obviously, for the 2023 college football season, CBS, NBC, and Fox. They went from 94 in the 22 season to 96 games broadcasted in the 2023 football season. And then the 2024 football season, the Big Ten is going to have 104 football games broadcasted on network TV. So the ACC during the 23 college football season, not including Notre Dame because that's an independent media TV schedule and contract, so not including Notre Dame, the ACC had 58 games on broadcast TV during the 2023 football season compared to 96 that the Big Ten had. So when you're going to look at the 2024 football season, you're going to look at basically it's rounded off to 60 games on broadcast TV for the ACC versus 104 for the Big Ten. So you're going to be able to see that the Big Ten Conference will be able to provide growth in the viewership for Florida State. So Florida State will be able to grow from the largest viewership school in the ACC to essentially the third largest one in the Big Ten Conference. So that's going to grow the overall value of Florida State as an institution, their athletic department. So the whole media value of Florida State is going to continue growing because they're going to get more eyeballs through the Big Ten TV contract. And as an institution, they're going to get more exposure. They're going to see an increase in applications. They're going to be able to expand and grow their whole aspects of the university. So when you're talking about viewership, yes, everybody is correct. the schools that always play on the main channels, ABC, CBS, etc., get the best views. Well, duh, of course they do, because those are the largest brands. Those are the largest universities. That's the schools that people want to watch. So 88%, and Tony knows this number inside and out. Yes, viewership is based off channel ranking and ranking history. Well, when you're talking about Florida State, well, the Bobby Bowden era, lots of success, 14 straight years of being ranked in either the top 4 or top 5 for 14 consecutive football seasons, plus more recent national titles. So from a football value perspective, people are always going to watch Florida State. The data is very clear on that. So Florida State being added to the Big Ten Conference, it's an absolute no-brainer. So that's what I had to present today, besides one more important part. So the audience value. So I was originally going to calculate Florida State's audience value, but I thought just pointing out Notre Dame's would hit home better than Florida State's audience value number here. So the Big Ten, they bring in a lot of viewership. So when Notre Dame is playing a game on NBC, do Big Ten fans stick or not? Which means there's a Notre Dame game, and then there's a Big Ten game that comes on afterwards. So the data is very clear that the Big Ten will stick from a Notre Dame game to a Big Ten game that's being played afterwards. So what that means for Florida State is if they're playing a game on Big Noon or a game against Notre Dame on NBC, or Florida State's playing an evening game on NBC, the Notre Dame game is going to still stick. A lot of the viewers that are watching that Notre Dame game, they're going to now bleed into that Florida State game. So there's a lot of audience value gain out there for Florida State just by being in that Notre Dame plus NBC relationship. So if the Big Ten can land Notre Dame, then you're going to be able to see massive growth in Notre Dame's audience value as well, because there'll be more people who will give a crap about watching Notre Dame football because they would be a member of the conference. So everybody knows about channels. Everybody knows about how many games that the SEC Big Ten has for 4 million viewers or more compared to ACC. That's a no-brainer. So the only other the only thing that's really left out there for a takeaway out of this is how much money can the Big Ten network gain by adding Florida State as a Big Ten member. There's a lot of complexities to it, so you have to take what the in-footprint price point would be in the state of Florida, and then you'll have how many TV sets will be a subscriber to the Big Ten network, and then what that value is contracted out for on a per monthly basis throughout an entire calendar year. And then that money will get distributed among certain entities. And then the total value that the actual Big Ten network would get would be between $75 million per year to $90 million per year. So it all depends on how many TV sets. And yes, YouTube TV counts in that number. And then you'll be able to figure out what is going to be the actual revenue number for the Big Ten network with Florida State as a Big Ten member after all of the money is distributed to all the folks that it needs to go to. So that's it. So that's my presentation today.
I wanted to bring one thing up that we should have mentioned in the beginning when we were talking about the breakaway. Another thing that is really helping push the breakaway is the college playoff. As you know, the Big Ten and the SEC was hoping when the college playoff was going to get bid out that they were wanting around $2 billion. And they found out that the first round games are not actually selling like they should. And that's another reason why they want to do a breakaway, because they feel that the college football playoff would make more money without some of these other conference teams being in it.
That's correct. Yep. And value that yeah, we almost totally forgot about this. It totally left my mind when I was preparing for it today. So the athletic departments were expecting $2 billion for the playoff between the current money and plus the new money that was coming in. Well, when they find out it's not going to be $2 billion, it pissed off a lot of athletic departments. So that's another reasoning why they're wanting more control over the college football playoff from a network perspective. Because when you're talking about the G5 versus a P5, the dollar value is not there for a P5 versus a G5 for the networks. I've gone into all those reasons on X. So what they're wanting to do is take games between the SEC and the Big Ten. Obviously, we're going to be included the top brands of the ACC within that environment. So then you're going to have all of the big TV viewership schools, and you're not going to be having to deal with is Cincinnati playing Alabama. You're going to have Michigan versus Alabama. Massive viewership as we saw from the Rose Bowl this year. So so it's going to bring more value, more dollars to the Big Ten and SEC if they have more control over the playoffs. So do they do 12 teams, 16 teams, 8 teams? I don't know that part yet.
Genetics, appreciate you being here. Want to definitely respect your time, knowing that you had about an hour here. Real quick, you had mentioned a timetable of roughly sometime in the next few months, sometime in the spring, that we'll see some kind of movement toward this. Is there anything out there that you could anticipate would hold that up?
Nope.
Okay.
Because even, what's his name here? Let me grab his name. There's an important name out there that agrees with me, Dan Lust. So he'll agree with me. There's some legalities that could get in the way, but there's nothing preventing the Big Ten and SEC from leaving the NCAA.
And then out of the other schools, this was focused on Florida State, of course, for good reason. North Carolina has been in the news recently as well as being a possible partner, or as you guys laid out, most likely going to the SEC. Virginia, again, a player in this, and probably to the SEC. So beyond that, in some kind of order, who are the schools of value? Miami's not been mentioned. Tide Guy brought up Clemson. You responded to that, as well as them kind of not being as assertive as they need to be at this point, but they're obviously the biggest football brand left on the table.
So do you want to include Notre Dame as an ACC member or no?
Sure, throw them in as well. Yep.
All right, so obviously Notre Dame's number one.
Yep.
So UNC, if you want to add Olympic sports along with football, is actually above Florida State. But if you just want to talk about from a football perspective, then obviously it's Florida State as number two. But this would obviously include Olympic sports. So it's Notre Dame, UNC, Florida State, Clemson. Then it's Miami, and then it is Virginia, and Pittsburgh comes in after that. So that's the order.
And so the Big Ten obviously operated with 11 teams for 30 years. Now, would they simply add Florida State, or do they believe that they really want to get to that 20 number and have somebody join with Florida State?
Well, it's easier to live with 20 members than 19,
Sure.
But from 19, you just go to a 10-game schedule, 5 road games, 5 home games.
Okay.
And I'm also hearing, though, that there is some talk that if Notre Dame wants to break away with the P2, that they would have to come up with, in order to stay independent, they would have to play X amount of games with the SEC also.
Yep,
They would have to
3.
play X amount. Yeah, they'd play 2 to 3 games with the SEC, and then play like 5 with the Big Ten. Then they could keep like Navy and a few of the others. But the SEC would want 2 to 3 games a year to help, one, get us some money, and plus it makes Notre Dame play better teams. So that way, if they do make the playoffs, they wasn't playing just non-power 2 teams.
And again, just to clarify, the analysis of the revenue coming in for the playoff and the disappointment over what those initial numbers could be for first round games, when you look at the likelihood that would include Utah or Oklahoma State or Kansas State or Louisville or teams like that versus third and fourth place teams from the SEC and the Big Ten, it's that significant to move the needle and cause change.
Yeah, because
100%. Yes.
if you had a Penn State versus an Ole Miss, or a Penn State versus LSU, or
Sure.
you know, even a USC, Michigan, because when you start bringing USC, Washington, and Oregon in, look at who the third place team could end up being in the Big Ten.
Sure. Yeah, just clarification. Yep.
Well, we're talking dozens of millions of dollars between a PP5 or P2 versus a P2 versus a P2 versus a G5, just in that one single first round playoff game. Dozens of millions of dollars of difference.
Yeah, for an example, Ohio State was playing Utah in the Rose Bowl a couple of years ago, and even with Utah being the opponent, 4 to 5 million more people watched that Rose Bowl, which in our thought process in this day and age was a meaningless game versus that Alabama-Cincinnati playoff game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like Genetic said, there's a $500 million that's left on the table. The Big Ten and the SEC thought with the playoff, and then if they broke away, then that money's just split between the two conferences. We don't have to split against everybody else. So I mean, that is a huge payoff.
I've got to think as this comes together, we could all think of a handful or more schools that are kind of on that cusp, whether that's NC State, Louisville, and others that are just going to probably try to shine themselves up as much as possible to make some kind of play to make the survival cut.
Yeah, because one of the things that I'm interested in, does the Big East associate themselves with this breakaway? Because it is basketball included into this, so I'd be very curious if the Big East can get their way into it too. Because everybody says the Big 12 conference is the best basketball conference in the country. The Big East is obviously better. Look at the data. So the Big East, if they can go into there with the P2, I think that'll be a very valuable asset to have in there.
That I can't comment on. I haven't watched a basketball game in about 10 years. So
yeah, I'm not a basketball guy either, Mark. So, but
well,
I look at the numbers.
I watched it and covered it for years. So certainly I don't mind basketball, and I've enjoyed it in the past, and certainly have covered Final Fours and NCAA tournaments and all sorts of stuff in my past, but have not been watching the game for the last decade or so. But that's what I hear. The Big 12, the Big 12, the Big 12.
Yeah. So really the biggest takeaway.
They tell us that in football too.
Yeah, the biggest takeaway from this conversation is really, why is that breakaway? Basically, why is it hot as a discussion and a movement perspective inside the Big Ten and SEC? Well, it's the ability to get out of the courts and stay out of the courts. Because if that, I can't remember what that court case is called, but the one that is asking for like $3 billion, if that was
the house case.
Yeah, if that goes through, you know how much financial damages is going to happen to each of these institutions? A lot.
Well,
That's why
they're going to have to settle it, because it's already got class action status. There's no doubt about whether or not they did it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how that settles out. Because again, it has class action status, and it's before the judge who already demolished them in the O'Bannon case. They got off pretty scot-free financially from the O'Bannon case, but it's literally in Judge Wilkins' courtroom in Oakland. Same judge who did the O'Bannon case.
Yep. So how do you get that case settled? Professionalize the Big Ten and SEC. Then that's going to get settled. If they stay under the NCAA, live under the current rules, they're going to lose their asses in court big time. They're going to have severe financial damage put on top of them as a result of that. But if you can professionalize, then you're going to be able to settle.
They have to settle it.
And they know
that. It will not go on for decades. They have to settle it.
I'm not telling any inside secret when I'm saying that they have to professionalize to get that case settled. Everybody knows it. Everybody's talking about it every single day. And that's why this movement is now suddenly happening much more aggressively. All you have to do is just go to Ross Dellinger's article, whenever that was, like a week or 2 weeks ago, and he pointed out about that. So it's all there.
This P2 was actually, in the works, but they were trying to kick the can down, past 2026 down the road a little bit. And then with all these lawsuits, and then, like you said, with the playoff coming in under par for the money, the P2 is going to get done. Probably they would like it done this spring. And for the people who's not in the P2, like the Big 12 and the rest of the ACC, it'll be fine for them because now they will be able to do their own national championship football on their own. They'll have their own playoff in that, and it'll give them a chance to actually win a title.
What we said tonight may not be received well among some people and may be received well among others, but we're not here to sugarcoat anything. I came on tonight to tell you the truth and all of that inside information. It's 100% all true, and I wanted to get it out there for y'all, and I got permission to do it from many people, so that's why
I also would be surprised if they find some. They may still find ways to do things a little more smoothly. So, keep an eye out for that. The standing up of an organization is very, very hard. I've been, watched that. I've advised parts of it. I've been parts of them. I've seen things, particularly, I remember when they were standing up like DHS and ODNI, enormous efforts. I can't even imagine trying to get the number of stakeholders together on behalf of the schools. So,
well, we do appreciate everyone being here at the Voice of College Football, Genetics 56. Thank you so much for making this happen. We appreciate you. I'm so glad we connected a long time ago, whenever that was, on X, Twitter at the time, and have been able to maintain contact. And you were on about 6-8 months ago. So thank you so much for following up on this.
Yeah, that's one of your most popular videos ever, it seems like. So there's like 50,000 views on that thing.
Absolutely. Let's do that again.
But I may be around when things get further developed down the road and I know more of the details. I'll probably be on one more time, probably. And that'll probably be it. Because at that point, everything will be pretty much all public by then. So